Good, hello, and thanks for watching another Sunday case study. This week we're looking at Pope Francis. What do his hands reveal? What's the story here? Often when I look at a palm, I ask myself, what is this palm trying to tell me? And in particular, I want to look at the relationship lines and just discover what we can about the Pope's psychology, who he is as a person, what his hands reveal in terms of his intentions and his perceptions. It's kind of a controversial subject. Popes are not meant to marry. However, we can see quite clearly here a marriage line, not just one, but two. And marriage lines in palmistry aren't necessarily marriages, but they are strong, impactful relationships. I have here quite a nice clear image of his hands, and I've got the left and the right here as well. So first of all, I'm just going to unpack what I can see here in terms of the chirognomy, that is the shape of the palms and fingers, and what this kind of basic personality template can tell us. In all of the images, the thumbs appear somewhat sort of closed in, tightened in towards the palm. The little finger is always kind of curved inward slightly, and both these things show us someone who is protecting themselves. They're guarded, they're secretive. There is something a little bit crooked about the fingers. However, I don't want to read too much into that because I know that Pope Francis has arthritis. He is 87. His numerology of his birth date adds up to the number 30 as a compound number 30. It's a very sort of solitary number, and solitary is exactly the sort of characteristics I would expect to see in this person's hands. People with that number 30 of that have, I mean, it's three as a life path number goes, but as a compound number, this is certainly someone who has very few friends, who isolates themselves and chooses to live that sort of life out of um, partly safety, security, because there's something of a fear of the unknown in the outside world, but also because people with that compound number are quite sort of um, prudent and um, solitary anyway. That's just their sort of character makeup, or at least it kind of contributes towards that. But I don't really see the hand of what I would expect to see in the 19th century system of six with the mixed seventh that Cairo was so known for, that William G. Benham also writes about in his book. Um, you would expect to see a philosophic hand. You would expect to see something of an intellectual hand in terms of what David Brandon Jones would classify, because that's classically what you see with monks and priests, people of the clergy, people of the cloth, who isolate themselves and study and focus on all that is higher and holy. Actually, the kind of hand classification that I'm seeing here is something more egocentric and a little bit sensual. There is a comic element to this hand, and it shows that kind of love for life and zest for life, and enthusiasm and motivation, um, a love of the pleasures of life, which is exactly the kind of thing that you would expect, the opposite thing you'd expect to see in someone who is so pious, or expect, you know, to be seen to be pious. The base of the palm is more narrow than the top's a broad topped palm. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It means someone who has a greater capacity for emotion, mental acuity, and the spiritual realm is certainly increased. This is someone who is concentrating less on the physical and the material, so that's a good sign in itself, placing more emphasis on the mental and the spiritual. The palm itself is separated into physical, mental, and spiritual, as are the fingers. And so when you see a greater emphasis toward the top of the palm, that makes perfect sense. However, to make up for that, there is lesser constitution, immune system, vitality, less physical energy to accomplish physically demanding tasks. Fingers themselves, as I say, I don't want to read too much into the finger leanings because I know this person has arthritis. There might be something in it, but there might not be. So I don't want to read too much into it. I think we just have to disregard this. I mean, otherwise this would not be a good sign. It would show some sort of crooked sexual expressive nature. But as I say, I don't want to look into this because it could just well be arthritis. The pinched in phalanges of the second finger, the second phalanx of the first finger, the Jupiter finger, it's in some way showing a kind of a reduction in going to put this managerial, executive sort of decision makings, that mental process about making the delegating and choosing and deciding organizational and management sort of skills are kind of restricted in some way and made up for by the need to control, for power, for dominance, um, and for indulgence, and also made up for by the well-developed tip of the Jupiter finger, which is exactly what I was hoping to see and expecting to see, because it shows again a greater development interest in the spiritual, religious studies, ideology, and the need to be in touch with and receive that sort of higher power. So we know that in some sense that this is someone who has their sort of mind frame in the right place. Their sense of self is something in, somewhat in line with their place in the world. I get mixed signals when I look at this hand because of the way the thumb is positioned as well. It's kind of high set. At least it provides that impression. It's not actually all that high set. It's middle, but it is always kind of closed in the positioning of it. The palm itself appears almost like a sort of a paw. And these are egocentric features in the palm. It's one of the least favorable palmar types to have as far as David Brandon Jones' method of classification is concerned. The most, I feel, comprehensive personality study of hand types. There are 12. So there are some elements here of selfishness, of the need to um, gain for the self and a lack of consideration for others to I think influence others to impose will to gain for themselves. But then there's also another element, another side to this person because they're not completely egocentric. The fingers aren't quite long enough, the thumb isn't quite high set enough, um, and the palm isn't quite narrow enough either. So there's something of an element there of self-concerned, but there is also that comes with that egocentric personality, that character type, something of tremendous instinct and almost sort of a sixth sense, extra sensory kind of intuition and an ability to kind of pick up on and know how to get the best out of every situation. But also the other side to their character is um, something more iconic, I would say, something much more favorable in terms of warmth of character, generosity, and spirit. So it's a real contradiction in terms of this person's nature. I think that sort of egocentric side of this person um, is it shows up in this sort of solitary nature. Egocentric people are generally have very few friends, partly because of the way they end up on the wrong side of people. They're quite happy to sell their friends off to uh, gain for themselves. And that's not necessarily this person at all. There is a very solitary nature to this person. I would think, I would hope they have all the best qualities of that egocentric type and also the best qualities of their more um, useful and kind of humble and jovial and warm, charismatic features that this palm presents. So you've heard me waffle on for long enough. Let's get into the lines in the hand. There appears to be a doubling of the lifeline. That's the most common interpretation I would think here, but actually this could well be a Mars line. And looking at this image with a bit more clarity, although it is dark, I would say that it is in fact a Mars line. The lifeline, thankfully, doesn't run too narrowly around the base of the thumb, which negates some of those negative egocentric qualities and again provides a bit more warmth and character, generosity, a friendlier personality, someone who's more approachable than the average. I see a few things in terms of the distance between the head and the heart line. These look like really nicely developed lines. There's good positioning of them. The heart line is nice and low. The space between here shows someone who's very open, and there's a great warmth again there about this person. The Jupiter mount is certainly there's a lot of space left here for this desire to elevate, to um, become an authority, to have control and power and utilize that. But then also the Jupiter finger is not overly long, and it's not doesn't appear to be too short either. So there's a good amount of understanding about this person's place in the world. They're not feeling inadequate and subsidizing for that feeling in any unhealthy way. It does appear to be something of a cross here on Jupiter. It could well be a star. It wouldn't surprise me if this was a star on the Jupiter map, and that would be actually something again that I would expect to see a sudden elevation in life, an almost kind of predetermined ambition that's fulfilled. You can see the same thing on the Dalai Lama's hands. I've already made a video on his palms as an excellent image I managed to gain to do that. There is something of that looks to be something of a kind of half a Solomon's ring here. There's something of one here, perhaps it's kind of overlapping, maybe. It's fairly strong, and it kind of forms a bit of a potentially a bit of a fish here. It's kind of hard to see. In any case, it's this creation of um, attitude and a good understanding for all the intuitive arts. It's almost an intuition line. It's that ability to pick up on what the five senses cannot, that aptitude to learn divinatory arts and occult sciences, and that often goes hand in hand with people who are very spiritual and religious. There is a sensitivity about them in terms of how they kind of receive information that is higher. That line looks really nicely developed. To someone who genuinely has a great capacity to care, to love, and desires to be loved as well. I find it interesting because you can see, if you look real close, where the Mars line, where the life on the Mars line begin, is where there is a tremendous achievement that inspires this person's brilliance and puts them on the center stage in front of the world all to see. There's a moment of elevation here, and it's around about the age of 25, and it's where this Mars line begins. It's where this okay, I need to fight for a cause begins. And you can see at that time where the lifeline and this Mars line kind of break away. Before this time, it's almost as though the lifeline is non-existent. It's one and the same with the headline. It shows this real sort of, again, isolated, overcautious, shy, reserved, um, a very sort of solitary nature about this person. And all of a sudden, they come out of their shell, they claim their independence, they make a mark on the world. And this mark is seen at the age of 25, I would say, something like that. And you can see a very faint kind of drifting line rising up between Apollo and Mercury. Apollo being reputation, glory, vanity, the way in which we are perceived by others and our talents and our skill sets. Um, it's everything that makes us shine as a person, Apollo being the sun, in between Mercury as well. It's how we express ourselves and how we communicate our message. Mercury, Hermes, god of communication. So, the fact we have this tremendous line of achievement and brilliance and success, um, that, it coincides quite literally with the success line, which kind of seems to run stem from, hard to see here, but it almost sort of points towards. I'm not sure if there's a break in the sun line, and the sun line comes from Pluto. It's really strong at Pluto, or if in fact it comes from the lifeline just a little bit inside it. I don't quite know. If it were to come in from inside the lifeline, it would show support from the family. Um, Actually, it would be something more pointed towards a creative career, an artistic one, something revolving around literature or art and support from the family to get there. So I don't think it's quite that. It could just be that it starts quite literally in the center, lower central plane of Mars. That would make sense. There has been a great amount of um, drive and study and hard work, perseverance, and working with others in quite hierarchical setting in order to get to where they are. That would make sense if that's the case. Would also, in some ways, make sense if it came from Pluto as well. The kind of break here, if that's what we're seeing, in that would mean that there is potentially this sort of need to um, fulfill a dream that was not quite fulfilled in a past life, and there was a something of a hiccup early on in life, but this was continued and achieved. I believe there was something of a hiccup late 30s, I would say, in this person's career, and after this, it really took a completely different turn. You can sort of see the direction, the bend of this person's path in life at this time. It's around about here. And on this image here, because it's lighter, you can just about see something of a disturbance here. So I'm wondering if there was an obstacle. And I do think that in fact, it may well have had something to do with this relationship. Obviously, being a pope, you're not supposed to have um, marital relationships. These are not necessarily marriages, although they are almost always referred to as marriage lines. Now, a marriage line that has this looks like it could be an island in the marriage line, but then I'm thinking, well, this looks like a fork, a divide in a union is quite literally that they split up. But notice how this rises on upwards afterwards. So it could be that there was potential breakup and there was a reuniting, but it doesn't result in the legal process of marriage itself, because a marriage line that rises upwards on a hand shows us there there will not be an actual legal marriage as such, but there will still be a faith and loving, committed union. There are, of course, in fact, two, and we see one much later on in life as well. So there could well be, have been two great loves in this person's life. And that's no judgment, that's no um, as I say, this is someone who has a great desire to love and be loved. And why shouldn't they? There seems to be, to me, two very different, polar opposite sides to this person's nature. There's this warm and loving side who's willing to consider everyone else. Notice how Apollo and Saturn lean in towards each other, very considerate towards others, their position, and they're very focused and um, firmly fixed in to their place into the world. They understand that, and there's no moving. They're almost sort of destined to their position in life. They're almost stuck with this position of helping others and considering others and the wider picture, the wide open world, and the impact that they have on that. There's a real strength of personality, um, a sense of charisma and generosity and warmth. But then there's also this other side of this person who is very reserved and somewhat emotionally crippled and unable to fully be them. There's something of a very secretive, a very withdrawn and very closed off nature is particularly early on in life. As this person ages, they become more open, they become more generous as they've gotten older. I think earlier on in life, they were probably someone who was quite um, cold, closed off, and I think they've warmed up. I think they've opened up. Certainly, high blood pressure noticed by the reddening of the tips of the fingers. There's certainly something of a tendency to overindulge in food. Find the horizontal line on the will, the determination and drive here an obstacle. There's a certain amount of frustration here that this person is not able to enact what they want to do. There are even forces higher than the Pope. Powerful people, I would think that are, in some ways, um, I wouldn't say influencing, but preventing this person doing and saying what it is that they want to do. That's partly why I think we see the thumb sort of so closed in, because this person's is in some way not able to be themselves. The thumb represents the entirety of a person. It is the summary of their character as a whole. It is all four fingers combined in a sense. So when we see it kind of closed in, pressed in towards the palm, especially when the thumb is kind of turned in, there is something preventing. There isn't enough free will, free reign. And I think that's certainly evident by the space in between Apollo and Mercury on both hands. There's a need for that freedom. There's a desire for that, and this is also someone who's kind of fighting back against that pressure. And I think that's the need for the Mars line as well as this person's position in life. Their position of power comes with an internal struggle as well, a fight of their own against against the establishment, against um, politics, social ideologies, religious ideologies. There's a need to influence and make great change. And so that's where the need to fight comes from. I think also that struggle that I see is quite internal. There's a lot of internal struggle here and repressed and oppressed. Um, a need to kind of break free and break out. There's a lot of secretive and sort of locked in, closed in isolation. I think this is an internal struggle as well. I think this person is kind of at odds with themselves as well. And that is partly why we see two polar opposites within this person's hand, the egocentric and the conic, this very sort of enthusiastic, motivated. Um, they're two completely opposite people I see here in this person's hand. The kind of tapering of the thumb here is a very kind of classic egocentric sign as well, but it's someone who certainly has refined taste. They don't have, as I say, a great amount of physical energy in reserve. They probably are very good at excelling in short bursts, and then they need a bit of a nap, need a bit of a snack as well. They spend a lot of money as well as I say, refined tastes. I think what we see in Pope Francis's hands is a very complex duality of inner psychology. I don't see anything that is too untoward, especially if we can disregard the potential arthritis in the fingers. Certainly, when you look at the left hand, notice the fate line and just how it almost cuts the palm in half. And this is pretty much always a sign of someone who feels their path is destined. They have no way of switching lanes. Their path is fixed in life. They have a destiny, and that makes sense with this person's role. A lot going on the Jupiter mount itself to be expected. I don't know if we do see a star. We certainly see something of a square here, and that's known as the teacher's square. This is someone who leads by example. The teacher's square is seen on the hands of many people, and it's not necessarily a sign of a teacher, but it is someone who preserves knowledge, passes on knowledge, and sees it in a way that is it shows a person's approach and personality because they're humble, they're gracious, they have a certain idea about what it means uh, to teach, to pass on, and to preserve information, to preserve history as well. One thing I do find very fascinating here is one of his success lines appears to rise from in between the head and the heart line, and it's out of Mars. It's this place of determination, resilience, endurance, stamina. This is not something that this person has a great deal of physically, but mentally, certainly mentally. And this is why we have a broad topped palm, why the top of the palm is much wider. This person can withstand a greater deal of mental pressure and has a greater amount of mental endurance. And it shows success through a dogged determination and quite an aggressive approach to um, solving a problem of success. There is a need to acquire fame and brilliance as well. There's a strong desire to achieve that. And that shows up in the more sort of egocentric side of this person as well. There is something of a doubling of the headline at the end of the headline, and it shows this person, it has a need to portray a slightly different character to the outside world. They have a slightly different way of thinking when they are in a very different environment. They kind of have a separate program in order to um, solve certain problems in a certain environment. And it's again, you see that with people who are in the limelight quite a lot. You see it in a lot of celebrities' palms. It's very common for when the cameras are on you, you have to behave in a certain way, you have to look a certain way. There's a certain image to uphold. And I think that's quite sort of telling about this person's nature as well. I think this person got where they are through um, absolute determination. And maybe some of the things that they did along the way weren't all that good. But I believe the end result is with a good intention in mind. I think there's an overall goodness within this person. And I think actually they have developed into a warmer, nicer, more appreciative, happier, and um, emotionally developed person, a more charismatic, open, generous, more decent person. I think that there has been a shift within this person. Certainly appreciate some of the things I've said in this video. It might well seem and feel very controversial. I'm sorry if I have offended anyone. It's not my aim at all. I'm just saying what the palms are saying to me and in particular about the marriage line, that might well tick some people off. As I say, I'm not trying to be contentious. I've always wanted to read the Pope's hands. I don't actually know anything about the Pope other than his age, his date of birth. Everything else really is just from what I've seen in the hands and the hands alone. I hope you have enjoyed this video and please let me know what your thoughts are. Perhaps you picked up on something that I haven't. Perhaps you've got your own thoughts. Perhaps you know a few things about the Pope and you might have a question. Feel free um, to throw anything in the comments below. Thanks very much for watching. Please subscribe. And if you would like to learn with me on a fortnightly basis, you can by signing up for my level 2 membership. Thanks very much. Bye bye.